Is that too close to my face? No.
No, close is good.
I feel like I'm just going to into it.
Hook to it.
No, but I mean like...
Welcome to In Bits, the podcast that deconstructs our digital lives. I'm Nicola.
And I'm Liam. So, Nicola, what are you in bits about again this time?
I am still in bits about trolling. We knew it would be a long episode. We didn't realise it'd be so long that we'd need two, but turns out the online world is just generally kind of in bits.
I kind of did, though. This is a habit now.
It is. Yeah, I know. It's me. I just like to yap. So this time we are going to talk about who the trolls are, what kind of people they are, and why does this happen so much online? Can anyone be a troll? And what can we kind of do to try and reduce this behaviour? I'm going to give some content warnings again. I was going to say they're slightly less awful than the last episode, but that's actually, there's no guarantee of that.
No, they're still, yeah.
Yeah, because I don't know what we'll end up talking about. But because we're talking about the trolls themselves more so than the victims a little bit here. So we're going to talk about kind of sexual harassment and other types of harassment. We'll talk about psychological distress. So if you need to, you can access mental health support services online. Please check our show notes for different resources. And if you feel like this isn't an episode for you, please do skip it. So Liam, can you remember what we talked about last time?
Yeah, it's only 2 weeks. My memory's not that bad. So we were looking at the various different motivations for trolling. So for entertainment, trying to find it kind of something funny, to attack-based trolling, which is obviously more distressing and malicious in terms of its intention. It's really commonly experienced. So half of people surveyed in their lifetimes have still experienced some form of trolling. So this is really substantial. And obviously, when it gets to the more distressing and pervasive forms of trolling behaviour. We looked at it in terms of minority groups as well. So the LGBT community, particularly trans community, and people who might be in the public eye, so celebrities generally. We looked at the experiences of victims, the typical psychological distress that we've spoken about, and how it can change our behaviours both in an online space and in an offline one. So moving away from those spaces, but also taking some of that potential trauma with you. Suppression of people's voices when we're talking about important topics or political issues, and then polarization of topics as well.
Yeah, we covered a lot.
Yeah, this definitely needs to be 2 episodes.
Yeah, and we still have a lot to cover. Like I said, there's a lot to talk about with trolling. So why does this happen? What is making people do this online? Is it just a whole bunch of terrible people that exist in the world that are doing this online and maybe not offline, or maybe they are offline? So let's look at the research on this. There are multiple factors involved, like so many different factors, ranging from the internet itself and why it might make us behave differently, to individual differences in people themselves, to the kind of spaces that we are in and what other people are doing in those spaces. Online disinhibition is a really big part of this. So do you want to explain what online disinhibition is?
Yeah, so online disinhibition is where... So obviously you spoke about the impact the technology has on how we communicate. So I cannot potentially see the person who I'm communicating with, and I decide, because I don't see their facial expressions, how they're responding to my content, I will sometimes do and say things that are either more nasty or I feel less remorse as a result of that. So that's toxic online disinhibition. We also have benign disinhibition, which is great. I like benign disinhibition. This is the happy space. That allows someone to seek support from an anonymous capacity where they have no fear of reprisal, that they're going to say be outed, or that they're going to see any form of negative interaction due to their information seeking.
Yeah, benign disinhibition, friend of the podcast.
Friend of the podcast. Toxic online disinhibition, not so much.
Yeah, foe of the podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, so online disinhibition is basically people's inhibitions being lowered. A bit like when you think about drinking alcohol, your inhibitions are lowered. You might act out in ways that you wouldn't when you're not drinking. Kind of similar thing, except it happens for different reasons. So it leads you to act in ways that are more intense or more frequent or more heightened than you might behave offline. So you might say things or do things that you just wouldn't offline.
But you also interpret people differently. So like solipsistic interjection is a part of the disinhibition effect. I think that's really relevant in a lot of spaces. So essentially I read a text message from someone else. I'm missing facial, visual cues, auditory cues from that person. There's no emoji in the text. I can't interpret what this person is saying. And I might interpret it as positive or negative, or say they've said one thing and I'm completely interpreting it or misinterpreting it, really importantly, in another way, which then also can create different problems for us too.
I'm very glad you talked about that one because I can't pronounce it.
That's fine. Solipsistic interjection. There's a number of those.
So there's a few things that contribute to disinhibition. So that one is one, I'm not going to say it because I know I'll get it wrong now. The fact that you can be anonymous is another one. The fact that you are invisible, you've no eye contact. So there's a few different things. The fact that it's through computer-mediated communication is a really big part of it. So like you said, you've got those reduced nonverbal cues. You can't see someone's facial expressions, their body language, their tone of voice, the pitch of their voice, and so on. And it's interesting that early researchers thought this would make it a very cold or a lean medium, particularly text-based communication, that you wouldn't be able to communicate like social or emotional cues, which obviously is not the case. Like we do that all the time now. But they did think that that would increase misunderstandings and incivility. And I think we can agree that that probably has been the case. Yeah. So these factors, so let's talk about a few of them. So asynchronicity, that's the idea that when you're talking face-to-face with somebody, it's synchronous, it's immediate. You can see their reaction to what you said, you get the response right away. You don't have time to edit something.
But you also get their micro cues in potential, if it's like a phone call or face-to-face, you get micro expressions. You have all those cues that we naturally respond to in conversation anyway.
Exactly. So you don't have to deal with these immediate reactions. Anonymity plays a part, but not always. So people always think that a lot of trolling and harassment and abuse online, negative behavior online, is because of anonymity. So you'll see politicians and other people suggesting that nowhere should be anonymous and that will cure all the problems with the internet. That is 100% not the case. So it can be a problem because it can mean that you feel like your online behavior isn't linked to your offline self. So
no fear of reprisal.
Yeah, exactly. And you feel kind of more private because of it. But actually the controversiality of what you're talking about or the space that you're in actually has a much bigger impact than anonymity. So a really nice example of this is a study from Rost and colleagues in 2016, and they looked at over 500,000 comments on a big social media site on over 1,600 petitions, right? So when you think about petitions, they are something that if somebody feels strongly enough about it to sign and comment on a petition, it's something related to their values and it's maybe a controversial issue and so on. And so what they found was that people who weren't anonymous were actually far more aggressive in the comments than people who were anonymous, because it was something that was about their like strongly held beliefs or their identity that was being challenged by others. And so these like firestorms would happen. So when you have a space, when you have a topic that is controversial, where you've got groups pitted against each other, where there's like a win-lose situation, where the issue is related to your core beliefs or your core identity. So things like sport teams, politics, religion, feminism, all of these things are topics that increase the likelihood of trolling, harassment, abuse, and toxic commentary.
Okay.
So what else? Invisibility, you talked about. That is about the lack of eye contact and the fact that you can't see somebody's reactions to what you're saying. And it really is one of the most substantial parts of online disinhibition, because you say something hurtful to somebody, you can forget about and you're very removed from.
It supports moral disengagement theory.
Absolutely, yeah.
No empathy required, no fear or consequence, long-term from an emotional consequences perspective.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Then you've got the idea of like in-group, out-group dynamics, which becomes heightened online because you can't see people again. So it's heightened by invisibility. So your group, you don't know each individual and their individual characteristics. So their group identity becomes more salient or more important to you. Same with the out-group. You can't see them as individuals and their group identity becomes more salient. And we know offline and online that when you've got in-group, out-group dynamics, the in-group is more likely to be harmful towards the out-group.
Yeah.
So that's a problem. You might be very absorbed in the task of being on Twitter or social media or wherever it is you are, and that reduces your public and private self-consciousness. And so you feel like nobody's really watching you, and so you don't have to be as careful about your behavior, but also you're not really watching yourself. And so you might engage in behavior that doesn't really align with your own internal values and standards because you're not thinking about it that way. And then social norms. So social norms are the implicit rules that govern our behavior in certain spaces. So like we all know that you queue in a particular way when you're like waiting for the bus. Well, some of us know. Some people don't know.
Okay, that's enough for another episode.
Maybe I should have picked a better example. But there are certain social norms that govern, like that we understand there are particular ways you behave. But if you go into a space or a platform where the social norm is to be toxic, you are much more likely to engage in toxic behavior. Yeah, totally. Same with trolling, etc. So it varies not only by platform. So like 4chan is going to be toxic when you go in there. Reddit, some spaces are, but some spaces aren't. Twitter, yeah, totally, especially nowadays.
But even if there's rules in these spaces, so in a lot of forums, you generally have content moderators, you have general rules like no shouting, so the use of caps, kind of language kind of rules, swearing, the amount of kind of posts and comments you can make and whether they're regulated or not. They're generally obeyed by the community. Someone who comes in with the intention to troll as like a firebomb in and out, they ignore all those rules. And the people or the community that's already there, that is already obeying these rules, is like, well, we have these rules. Why have they not protected us as well?
Yeah.
So that also has an impact. That's in some of the research too, which I think is...
It is, yeah. And I think the interesting thing there is the people whose intention is to come in and troll and disrupt versus people who get caught up in an environment where that is normalized. Yeah. And who end up doing it, but didn't go in with that intention.
Yeah.
And those two things together are quite problematic online. So like Twitter, there was always a bit more of a norm of behavior, of quite toxic behavior on Twitter. But since Elon Musk took over, it is literally the purpose of the platform now is just trolling and nastiness and toxicity. Like it's very hard to get away from it because it comes from the top down and it's being modeled by the guy who's owning it. And it's cultural. So even if you don't go in with the intention of trolling, people can get caught up in it. It reminds me of what Becky was saying in the first episode about kind of getting caught up in the idea of seeking out these kind of interactions on Twitter. So I'm going to play your clip again, just a piece of it to remind us of that.
Back in 2021, I incurred the ire of a community of anti-vaxxers on Twitter. I was able to get a bunch of the ringleaders permanently deleted from Twitter. And I felt really good about that. But then I found myself reaching for my phone in order to get annoyed by people like this. I went looking for confrontation and I realized that's what these people are like. They're addicted to online conflict. And I don't think there's any winners in an online fight.
I think it's interesting how the social norms of an environment where those toxic behaviors are encouraged can lead you to start seeking this stuff out if you see it as normal. And if you're getting some sort of enjoyment or positive feedback from it, like Becky said about getting people deleted from Twitter who are just horrible people, can be quite enjoyable. And you might start to seek that out.
But she's getting people she's had direct interactions with. And then if she's seeking out other people who have either directly targeted her or not, trying to give someone else that same sense of relief. So I can understand the motivations. I can also completely get her moving away from that space rather than carrying around that negative experience or trauma too.
Yeah. And I think that thing about, there's no winners in an online fight is probably true. The only reason that I would argue with someone online really is for anybody who's looking on. I think you generally don't convince people of stuff online, but for other people who aren't decided on a topic, it can be useful to see someone arguing back. Not arguing, but like discussing back.
Yeah. It depends. I'm happy to report content online. I don't know whether I would invest that much time or energy in having a row online.
I certainly wouldn't on Twitter anymore. Like, that's completely pointless. Let's go back to the research that I was talking about earlier, which looked at the group of people who were trolling the McCann family on Twitter. What they did was analyze the language that was used by this group and found that it was utilized in a variety of ways. So the anti-McCann group were constructing a group identity and negatively stereotyping and disassociating themselves from the pro-McCann group. So there were these two factions on Twitter, those who believed that Madeleine McCann had been taken by somebody and abducted and felt a lot of sympathy for the McCann family, and those who believed that the McCanns had done something to her themselves and had no sympathy and were really vitriolic about her. Right. So the anti-McCann group had several strategies that they were using. So they were provoking the pro-McCann group. They were derogating members of the pro-McCann group. And this has this kind of supports all the previous research, which links trolling to Western media culture, which tends to be very combative and polarized, and also to characteristics of antisocial personality disorder, which I think is really interesting. So it was noted that a lot of the anti-McCann contributors were absent during typical working days. So these were people who were working, but some were there all the time, continuously. So some of them might have been more privileged and didn't need to work. One actually specifically said that they were a rich housewife who did this because they had time to. Others might have been in different time zones, or they might have been doing this throughout their workday. Like
it's
really
a lot of time and
vitriolic comments.
investment in this, isn't
It
it?
really is, yeah. So they would distribute memes and offensive images to try and get a response out of the opposite group, the pro-McCann group. They often talked about an us versus them kind of
Typical in-group
dynamic.
and out-group language.
Very
isn't it,
much
as well?
so, yeah. With like the McCanns as the out-group and anyone who supported them. And they would assign negative traits to that out-group, like the inability to protect their children and so on.
The typical out-group behaviour. And
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
What was really interesting from the findings in this was there was one big theme, which was the discussion of motherhood and how important it is and how important to protect your children and all of this kind of conversation going on within the anti-McCann group. So that kind of conflicts with the idea of the majority of trolling research finding that it's men who are doing the trolling, where this group was a lot of women doing it. So sometimes you see men trolling under the guise of pretending to be women, but within this group, it appeared that a lot of women were actually involved. But what was really fascinating was they didn't identify as trolls. So even though they were engaging in trolling behavior and harassment, they weren't identifying as trolls. They actually identified and constructed a social identity as a group of justice seekers.
Okay, so this is
For
like
Madeleine
citizen
McCann.
journalism that we
Yes.
spoke about earlier.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think this is something that you see quite commonly now within conspiracy thinking groups in particular. This idea that we have the knowledge and we're against all the people who are trying to mind control us or try to control us through vaccines or through all these kinds of things. I think you see that where they wouldn't identify themselves as trolls. They identify themselves as truth seekers or justice seekers.
Well, it's validating motives, intentions, we're right, you're wrong. It feeds into that in-group, out-group culture as
Yeah.
well, and kind of encourages that behaviour to continue.
Yeah. So the people who were targeting the McCanns didn't self-identify as trolls. And another area where that's quite common to not view yourself as a troll or to not view yourself as harmful is in celebrity gossip. And I think what's interesting about this is I was searching for celebrity gossip on Google Scholar to find the research in this, and I really wasn't finding all that much. I thought there'd be a load on this until I realized that the term that's used by researchers is actually celebrity bashing, which I think is a much more accurate term and more accurately reflects the kind of behavior that's involved in this. So there's an intention in it that's harmful, that makes it different to just sharing useful or harmless gossip. So gossip, I think, has a spectrum as well. And I think with this, that there is an in-group, out-group dynamic here as well, a bit, again, like the McCann's trolls, where there's the anti-McCanns and the pro-McCanns. But here the celebrities are the out-group because they have perfect lives, whereas everybody else is the in-group who are normal people. And so it is different to trolling, but I think there is a lot of overlap here, and particularly in how it's experienced by the targets, so by the celebrities or the people in the public eye themselves. So I do want to talk about it for a minute here. We mentioned in the last episode that Aoife Moore had made a multi-part podcast documentary on trolling a while back. It's really excellent. So see the show notes on where to find that. And it focuses on gossip sites in particular quite a bit. But obviously what happens in gossip sites can apply outside of those sites too, in other places where people are engaging in this kind of gossip or celebrity bashing. So in the comment section on Instagram or TikTok, for people who have posted these videos, there can be a lot of this content there as well. But Aoife spoke to us about her experience with these sites and with other harassment and trolling that she's experienced online.
So I would say that trolling and the abuse that I encountered online definitely changed me as a person. I have always been incredibly confident and outgoing, and I still am, but there is now constantly a niggle in the back of my mind, no matter what I do in my line of work, that I will receive some kind of backlash for it. That becomes more intense when it's work I'm really proud of or work that's very personal. Every single facet of my personal life has been dug into, used against me, used as material to defame my character. I've had people slag off my family. I've had people slag off my previous partner. I have been slut shamed. I've had my reputation in some quarters ruined by completely unfounded rumours about my personal life. I deleted Twitter and lost about 80,000 followers. I don't really miss it. I have a second one now that has much less followers and I don't post on it very much. I think when I'm out and people approach me, there is always a split second where I'm afraid they're going to say something negative or have, aggression towards me. I've been lucky that that hasn't happened yet. I think the most insidious thing for me was not, the sectarian abuse that I received and the partitionist abuse I received in my line of work, but it was mostly the trolling from women that hurt me the most. The constant sniping about my personality and my appearance and, these websites that are set up to tear women down, and it is just women that they tear down. There's threads and threads about me and my family and my personal life, and it really broke my trust in people. I used to be a very open person and very naturally trusting, but I'm not anymore. And no matter what I post on social media, my first thought is, how can people use this against me? It doesn't stop me posting, but it is always going to be a thought that I have in my head. I have achieved a lot in my career despite the torrent of abuse that I've received. But my concern would be that other young women will be put off choosing the same career that I chose because of what happened to me. We know already that it's put off young women and getting involved in politics, and I fear that it could put young women off getting involved in journalism as well.
So it's quite obvious that this behaviour online really affected her personal life. She suffered a lot of reputational damage. She worked as a political correspondent, and that is somewhere where you want your reputation to be taken seriously. And this kind of gossip really, she felt like it was having quite a serious impact on her. And it had an impact on her personal relationships because of that as well. And it made her think twice before posting. Now she still posts lots, thankfully, because she's great. But she is also worried that it's going to put people off journalism, because we know that women have already been put off in political careers because of this. And I can see that happening in journalism as well.
But there's this assumption that if you're trolling or commenting on someone else's life, if they're in a public facing scenario, that people view that this is acceptable behavior, and that it doesn't have the same impact, because it, like the disassociation we've spoken about previously, it just because you're commenting on someone and you're doing so at a distance doesn't mean it's not going to have a very significant impact.
Yeah, just because you can't see their reaction doesn't mean they're not reacting. So there is some research on this, on why people engage in this kind of celebrity gossip or bashing. And like I said, it's a bit different to trolling, which is purposefully antagonizing other people on the internet. So it's not trying to get a rise out of the celebrity themselves necessarily, but it does serve other purposes. So gossip itself, there's quite a lot of research just generally on gossip, and it can serve a lot of purposes, right? So it can relieve stress, it can create social bonds among a group, it can consolidate friendships, provide entertainment, it can facilitate the exchange of information. So sometimes it's really useful to find out information about someone who could potentially be harmful. So a good example of that is whisper networks among women about sexual predators in particular industries. That's useful gossip. But it also has a lot of potential to damage people's reputations, often without justification. And it's often used to pull down others. And that's a really, really key part of it. And that is one of the key parts of the celebrity bashing.
Again, it's intention.
It is intention. Yeah, it's that harmful intention. What appears to be a really key motivator here is envy, right? That is really involved in that function of pulling other people down. So envy is when you lack something that you desire. and someone else possesses it. And it has two components to it. The first is inferiority, so feeling inferior to the person that has the thing you desire. And the second is hostility, so like having an emotional reaction of frustration or anger or shame to feeling less than the other person, or to feeling like your desires are being frustrated. So the person who possesses the thing that you envy is viewed as superior, but you also might regard that as being very unjust or unfair that they possess what you want. So we know that social comparison is hugely, hugely common in social media, right? There's a whole ton of research on social comparison. I'm sure we're going to touch on it again around things like body image and all sorts of stuff. Yeah. But there is quite a lot of research on social comparison and envy. And comparing yourself to people who are doing better than you may lower your own self-evaluation and self-esteem, right? It's not a given. It doesn't necessarily always happen, but it can do. And part of it is that like social media encourages us to post the highlights of our life, right? We're not posting our breakfast every day. We're posting when we go on holidays and when we have a night out and when we do something fun or we see something interesting. And that can increase the effect of social comparison because we're only seeing the best of people. And where gossip is used, it's kind of to equalize things, to bring the other person down, which helps you restore your own self-evaluation to make yourself feel better, essentially. So there's a really interesting study by Ing, Lin and Lee quite recently, 2023, and they looked at envy and Instagram use. And they looked at it from two different perspectives. So gossiping and self-improvement. So it's not that Instagram always leads people to feel bad and socially compare and gossip. There might be another aspect to that, and that is self-improvement. So what they looked at was dispositional envy. So this is a personality trait that we all have. We all fall somewhere on the spectrum of dispositional envy. It's quite stable. So some people are much more likely to feel envy than others. So we all feel envy occasionally, right? Like you see the people with the absolutely lovely house or the amazing outfit or whatever it is. We all feel that sometimes. But people who are higher in dispositional envy are much more sensitive to things that might signal that they're inadequate in comparison to other people. And they're also much more likely to engage in upward social comparison, which is comparing themselves to people who are doing better than themselves. And because they're more likely to interpret information this way, so they're more sensitive to the cues of this, they also react differently to information than people who are less likely to feel envy regularly. So I might see someone posting about their new house and be happy for them, but someone who's high in dispositional envy will feel angry at them. They'll feel hostile towards them, and they'll feel like maybe they didn't deserve it. Even within dispositional envy, it's really interesting. There's two types of envy that people might be more likely to feel. So one is malicious and the other is benign. A bit like disinhibition, toxic and benign. So they both come from that experience of feeling painful emotions when you engage in upward social comparison. So when you compare yourself to someone doing better than you, but they differ in the behavior and the motives for how you behave and how you level the difference between yourself and the other person that you view as superior. So Ing and colleagues found that people who are higher in malicious envy are much more likely to use Instagram for gossiping than those who had benign envy. So people who are higher in benign envy used it for self-improvement rather than gossip. So there's actually a positive aspect to it. So benign envy, while you are feeling pain that you're not doing as well as someone that you're comparing yourself to, it can also elicit a feeling of admiration towards the people who are doing well. Those people deserve their success because they worked for it. And so you see those people maybe as a role model, and that might inspire you to self-improve.
But it's two sides of the same coin between malicious and benign envy. The malicious envy really reminds me of the inferiority aspect that you spoke about earlier. I feel inferiority, and potentially that envy is now malicious, and I'm going to engage in that upward social comparison, and I'm going to try and drag that person down.
Exactly.
And like that is, depending on who the target is, that's going to have more or less of an effect.
Yeah.
Whereas we can use the benign envy to engage in self-improvement and actually be happy for someone else.
Yeah, to learn something about ourselves from it and find some ways to be inspired.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that toxic envy actually stops people from experiencing the potential for self-improvement and growth. So if you're experiencing toxic envy, you cannot experience benign envy at the same time. So it eradicates any potential for improvement there, and you can only get toxic behaviors from it. So it's quite interesting. And I'm going to talk in a minute about some other characteristics and traits that are associated with that malicious envy. But I want to look a little more at what makes people more likely to engage in this behavior. So there's quite a bit of research on these traits and celebrity bashing, but it's primarily on adolescents. There's actually very little on adults, which is really interesting. So if anyone out there is looking for a research question, there's a really big one for you. But with adolescents, it basically comes down to norms of behavior. So what your peers are doing, as well as what your favorite celebrities that you follow are doing, inform how much you're likely to behave in this way as well. So when your peers or your favorite celebrities engage in bashing other celebrities, you're much more likely to do it as well. And if you do this, you're also more likely to do it to your own peers as well, right? So it seems to be something that if you engage in this kind of behavior, you do it across the board, not just to celebrities.
It's social learning theory is what it reminds me of. Bandura learned behavior in my PhD research. Parents, or if they had a negative opinion of a teacher, the child was more likely to be disruptive and cause negative experiences.
Interesting.
So exactly the same kind of role model aspect.
Except this paper actually looked at parent behavior as well, and they didn't find an impact for parent behavior in this particular instance. Yeah. So it was peers and other celebrities, and peers was the strongest impact, much more so than what your favorite celebrities are doing.
Maybe because of who the target is.
Yeah. And because probably the celebrities that peers are bashing are a different type of celebrity to what your parents might be following.
Okay.
So it might be having less impact because of that. So basically what happens is they see their peers bashing celebrities and they learn that this behavior is normal, and that lowers the barrier to them doing it themselves. Like I said, there's not much research that I've seen on this with adults, but given the effect of social norms, it is quite likely that this has a similar effect. So if you're hanging around with a bunch of people who are bashing celebrities, it's quite likely that you're going to engage in it as well, or certainly more likely.
Yeah.
Adolescents have also been found to see aggression towards celebrities as being more tolerable than towards regular people. So they often find it quite funny when their peers do it, whereas towards other people, not necessarily seeing it as funny.
It's normative influence, wanting to fit in with your peer group rather than going against the grain.
Exactly, yeah. What we do know from the research is that young people underestimate the impact of this behavior on the celebrities that they're bashing. So first of all, they think that, celebrities get so many comments, they can't possibly read them all, so they're not really going to see it in the first place. And so that doesn't really matter. And the second is that being online, just getting hate is part of that experience, and they just need to deal with it. If they want to be famous, they got to deal with this stuff. I think we saw a lot of that around Chapel Roan. And, her kind of trying to maintain boundaries and privacy. And people were like, well, if you want to be famous, you've got to deal with all this shit that you get. And that's just not the case.
There's no empathy. It's put yourself in that person's shoes and then understand that maybe you might change your opinion about how public someone might be and whether it's appropriate or not.
Like if you have 10,000 people bashing you, maybe that doesn't feel great, even if you're a celebrity. Yeah. Before we get into the personality traits of trolls, Let's ask ourselves some questions. Are we trolls? Are you guys trolls? There was a scale developed to assess trolling, and the questions on it are quite funny. We'll talk about how I feel about them after we ask them.
Are you the potential troll, or am I?
You're the potential troll. I'm asking the questions.
Okay, grand.
So it's called the Global Assessment of Internet Trolling, and it's by Buckles and colleagues. So basically, you score this from 1 to 5. So 1 is where you strongly disagree with the statement, and 5 is where you strongly agree with the statement. So you can end up with a score somewhere between 5 and 20. 5 being not a troll, 20 being definitely a troll. Okay, so these are the questions. I have sent people to shock websites for the lulz.
Maybe years ago, I would say it too. And yeah.
What? Okay.
Yeah.
No judgment.
It's okay.
Yeah, right.
You want me to be honest?
I don't know if I do now. I'm like, who am I making a podcast with? Okay, second one. I like to troll people in forums or the comment sections of websites.
Oh, strongly disagree. Don't have time for that.
Okay. I enjoy griefing other players in multiplayer games. Oh my God.
I play a lot of Call of Duty with my brothers. Like, they deserve it.
Maybe siblings are all just trolls to each other all the time.
I'm going to have to say 3. I'm going to go neutral with that because it's, it's normative behavior. It's acceptable.
Sure.
It's only us.
Whatever you need to tell yourself.
Friendly fire off.
Okay, last one.
Okay.
The more beautiful and pure a thing is, the more satisfying it is to corrupt.
No, that's a 1.
Yeah.
So
I think you could probably just ask people that one, and that would give you a good indication of where people are.
I'm at a 7. I'm okay there.
Okay, you're fine. Yeah. 5 is completely no on everything. So 7's not too bad. I'm basically 5. I don't troll people. I don't play multiplayer games, and I don't send people to shock websites ever.
I'm going to get you playing Call of Duty, and we'll see how that answer turns out.
I'll just be really nice to everybody.
You won't.
So obviously higher scores mean you're more likely to be a troll, and lower scores mean you're not. I have thoughts about some of the questions. Like, I do feel like some of it's quite specific, griefing other players in a multiplayer game. If you don't troll in multiplayer games, then you're going to score 0 on that, obviously. Sending shock websites for the lulz. Lots of trolls don't necessarily do that. They have other forms of trolling. Trolling people in the comment section of websites. Yeah, that one potentially would capture a lot of people. But that final one about the more pure and beautiful thing is, the more satisfying it is to corrupt, I think captures quite a lot of it, but not quite all of it.
Psychopathic trait.
Yeah, exactly. But it seems, more about the traits rather than the behavior a little bit. So
And
it's
they're
kind of
situational
weird.
too.
Yeah, it's interesting.
It's not really fit for purpose. 5 questions to assess whether I'm a troll or not. I think qualitative approaches are much better here.
Yeah. So what kind of people are trolls? So you've got the impact of the internet itself and those characteristics we talked about, the social norms of the spaces. But then there are particular people within that who are more likely to be trolls than others. And we know that personality traits definitely play a part here. And in particular, the dark personality traits, the dark tetrad. And these are Machiavellianism, which is people who are more manipulative and deceptive in nature. They're not really concerned with kind of conventional morality, and they have a lack of interpersonal affect, so a lack of emotion around interpersonal contact. I will say about these traits is that they are non-clinical, right? So it doesn't mean that someone has a clinically disordered personality. And we are all somewhere on the spectrum of these traits, like all personality traits. But people who score higher in them have more of these characteristics. The second one is narcissism. And that is generally considered to be people who have high levels of vanity and self-enhancement. There are parts of it that aren't associated with Machiavellianism, for example, but they do have a kind of exploitative interpersonal style that's similar to Machiavellianism, and a sense of superiority and entitlement and selfishness. Narcissism is actually less associated with trolling than some of the other traits. They tend to be more self-absorbed, so they engage more in a downward social comparison to try and feel superior to others. So they're less likely to engage in trolling itself. Psychopathy, however, is very much related to trolling. So it's been found in quite a few different studies. And this is someone who has kind of aversive interpersonal characteristics. So they're someone who's very callous. They don't suffer from remorse at all. They're antisocial in their behavior. They can be very impulsive as well. And the final one is everyday sadism. And sadism is a little bit unique among the dark personality traits. It's the fourth one that forms the dark tetrad. And it does share some of the dark core of personality with psychopathy, narcissism, and Machiavellianism. But the difference and what makes it really distinct from the others is that it has an appetite for cruelty. So they enjoy inflicting cruelty on other people. And this is, again, one that we see quite a bit in trolling behaviors.
So you're more likely to see sadism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism.
Yeah, particularly sadism and psychopathy. A number of research studies have looked at personality and trolling, and they found that in particular psychopathy and sadism are likely to predict trolling behaviors, as well as something called negative social potency. This actually in one study was the strongest predictor, and that's someone who enjoys inflicting psychological pain and distress onto others. Other studies have found sadism to be the strongest predictor, as well as psychopathy and enjoyment. Some aspects of narcissism. Generally, what it suggests is that trolling is like an internet manifestation of everyday sadism and psychopathy as well. What's interesting as well is that people who are higher in these dark traits are also higher in levels of schadenfreude, which is a great word, and lower in empathy. And they generally just hold more negative perceptions of other people, right? So they view other people more negatively overall. On one hand, psychopaths prey on victims that they perceive to be weaker and showing less self-esteem. On the other hand, they tend to be quite curious and sometimes prefer to prey and bully people that are more liked and are perceived as having higher social status. So they're people that are considered to be more popular. And that's where celebrity bashing can play a part, right? Taking someone down to a level to make themselves feel better.
And it relates back to the kind of envy and empathy that we've spoken about already.
Exactly, yeah. So there's definitely an aspect to it that is these really deeply unpleasant people online are also probably not great people offline as well.
We can see how these link into like the negative social potency, links into the motivators, seeing the impact like we spoke about earlier.
Exactly.
I respond on Twitter. They're seeing the psychological impacts on me and are continuing because they're getting that reward seeking that they have been looking for.
Yeah, there's been other studies that looked at the kind of humor that they enjoy in Schadenfreude, like laughing at people rather than with people is also part of it. So there's certainly an enjoyment aspect to this, which is quite dark. As well as that, low self-control, people who are more short-tempered, more aggressive in general are also more likely to engage in aggressive behaviour online. I looked to see if we have any research on the traits of this celebrity gossip or celebrity bashing behaviour itself rather than trolling, because it is a little bit different. And again, we come back to that dispositional malicious envy is really associated with kind of maladaptive social tendencies, with Schadenfreude, which we talked about a minute ago, that laughing at other people rather than with them. It's also associated with increased aggression and fewer pro-social behaviours. So pro-social behaviour is behaviour that helps other people. It's associated with social undermining, so trying to undermine people, with lower self-esteem and lower well-being. So there's a lot of negatives that come with having higher dispositional malicious envy. It's also associated with narcissistic rivalry and moral disengagement. So while we don't necessarily see narcissism so much in trolling, we might see it more here in the celebrity bashing, because this is someone who's trying to bring somebody else down to make themselves feel better. And the moral disengagement allows you to disconnect from what you're doing and not think about how it might be affecting somebody else. So I haven't seen research on the dark traits necessarily for gossip behavior, but with these characteristics of malicious envy and with Schadenfreude in there, it really wouldn't surprise me to see psychopathy, everyday sadism, and possibly Machiavellianism in there as well, alongside the narcissism. And those dark traits have been linked to so many online toxic behaviors. Like, you're going to be hearing about them again, because so much like cyberbullying, cyberstalking, all those kind of things have been linked to these dark traits as well. Moral disengagement has also been really quite strongly linked to both mild and severe online aggression towards celebrities as well. And that is where you are just disconnected from the effects of what you're doing and what negative effects that might have on the person that you're targeting. So an interesting study looked at the people who were observing celebrity abuse, right, on Twitter. So not necessarily taking part in it, they're just people who are seeing it. And they found differences in how much celebrities are victim blamed for the abuse that they're receiving, and how the differences in the perceived severity of that abuse, depending on who they are and what they were tweeting about initially. So one of the key aspects of it was if their initial tweet was either negative, neutral, or positive in tone. So when they tweeted something that was negative or neutral and people responded abusively to it, that was viewed as being less severe, and they were blamed more for the abuse that they received.
It's just like the internet astounds, I think. With some of this.
I know. This happens offline as well.
Yeah, but when you go through the dark tetrad, and we're looking at all of these problems together, even having a handful of these, this person needs significant support.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. They found higher psychopathy was linked to perceiving the abuse as less severe, particularly when the abuse came after positive tweets. And as narcissism in the viewers increased, they were more likely to victim blame and less likely to think that the abuse was more severe as well. So it's really interesting the way the interplay of these personality traits with not only the abusive behavior, but also how people are even viewing the abusive behavior and how much sympathy they feel for the victims and their perception of whether this is a problem or not.
Like the moral disengagement aspect of it, the online disinhibition effect, all of those are compounding this further.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ordinary people can also become trolls. So just because you don't have scores that are a bit higher in these dark personality traits doesn't mean that you are never going to engage in trolling. So there are certain factors or trigger mechanisms that can make you more likely to engage in trolling. Your individual mood, you're having a terrible day or terrible week can be part of it, or the context of a discussion. So seeing troll posts by other people. So again, we're back to those social norms of a particular space. If you're having a bad day and you go into a space where everybody is saying horrible things to each other, you might be more likely to engage in that behavior.
Bandwagoning. Like bandwagoning.
Bandwagoning, yes. Yeah, exactly. The other thing we know is that people who are more mindful are less likely to engage in trolling, and people who have strong self-concept, so a good sense of who they are and don't get swayed easily by other people, who have strong self-identity and strong self-control are less likely to engage in aggressive comments and aggressive toxic behavior online as well. Okay, so we've talked about the problem with this, who does it, who it's happening to, the consequences of it, but how can we combat it, I think is important to talk about. What we know is that tech control, so reporting, blocking, and really good moderation help a lot. So they help set up social norms of behavior that are just better and less toxic. When toxic behavior is punished, it's less likely to happen in a space. So creation of positive social norm behavior is also really positive as well. So if you're setting up a new community space, try and encourage that behavior right from the start. Just discourage toxic behavior right from the start, because that's the easiest way to control it. The regulation of anonymity, like I said, really not very effective, because if it's something controversial in any way, people will still engage in toxic behavior. And actually, if it's close to their values, they're more likely to. A review of organizational strategies by Deneva and colleagues looked at what actually worked, what was effective. So ignoring is very common and not effective at all. Clarifying and providing more information, also not effective at all. What is more effective in an organizational sense, so let's say you're on social media as a brand and you have trolls, is supporting and thanking or agreeing with the people who support you. So if someone challenges the troll and says, no, they're actually great, supporting them and thanking them works better, because you're encouraging more of your community to stand up for you.
Positive atmosphere and environment.
Exactly, yeah. And then removing comments helps to stop repeating the trolling. Being assertive about the organization's mission or making a strong statement actually reduces the frequency. And actually making an appeal for users to change their behavior changes the frequency as well. So that's probably less likely to get very specific and purposeful trolls, but more likely to get people who are caught up in it, like making them think about their behavior for a minute can help. So what do people do? The DCU Anti-Bullying Centre study found that like less than half of people actually take action in response to their experiences at all. A lot of them didn't think it was serious enough or didn't know what to do or that anything would change if they took action. Most people who did take action spoke to their families or friends or reported it to the website or social media company or blocked the account. Very few actually contacted the authorities. So in that study, 18% contacted the guards and only 7% reported it to hotline.ie.
Okay, to have the content removed entirely. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Almost half of the respondents had experienced no negative impact on the hateful communications they'd received, but young people experienced more negative impact than older age groups. And what about attitudes towards this? So what they found was most people agreed that introducing legislation to prevent online hate would be a positive. So 74% agreed with that. Most people also agreed that social media companies should do more to stop the spread of online hate. We had nearly 80% agreeing with that. But 18 to 24-year-olds were much less likely to agree with those two statements, which I think was interesting, and also much more likely to experience hate. So maybe they're viewing it as more normalized and just part of the online experience. And so they just kind of get on with it or have accepted it.
Or is it an aspect of they just feel like they can't do anything? This powerless aspect.
Powerless, yeah.
Maybe the communities that you spoke about, the positive culture or online kind of climate in those spaces, if it's isn't a positive space and they're already in it, maybe they feel like that individual aspect, I can't change anything about it. which often actually isn't the case. So if you see those kind of like positive strategies you spoke about.
Yeah, because they were less likely to agree with the statement, I believe that everyone has a role in tackling hateful content online as well.
But
So
is that
you
like a
might be right.
disenfranchised aspect? Or is it, I just can't be bothered to deal with that and take it on?
Yeah.
Is it also that disinhibition effect where we can also see that they're not seeing the person who's being victimized? They care less about it. They do less in terms of like reporting content. And it's something, if I'm talking to young people, I say, well, I question them and I say, well, what have you reported online? How did that process go? Like, I know what the feedback kind of stages are depending on the platform. And I'll ask them about the time, the effort, why they don't report content, this bystander effect that we see online, which is reduced if our disinhibition is also increased to the person who's being victimized, never mind the person who's trolling. And they view the strategies potentially aren't as effective.
Yeah. I mean, I know myself from reporting content on Twitter in particular, even before Musk took over, it's useless doing it now, but even before that quite blatantly awful things would come back as not violating community standards. And that does feel very disempowering. Like you feel like you have no control over the space. So I can understand why they might feel like that.
Particularly on that platform, I think depending on the type of content that is on like image-based, more predominantly image-based platforms like Instagram, that content tends to get regulated a bit better, particularly like comments under images, especially if they're about someone who is a younger person. It's an image of themselves, which they are entitled to the ownership of. There's a lot more we can do with those types of trolling comments.
Yeah. Okay, this has been fun.
It is. It's not
very
something
dark.
It's very dark. We'll talk about something happier next week.
We will, yeah.
Remember, if you are impacted by any of this content, to go and seek supports. Check our show notes. There's a number of support services that you can go and seek support from. Also, if you've been impacted just generally by the topic we've been discussing, go and find something online that you enjoy, whether it's pictures of dogs or cats or something. Just use that little 5 minutes to recoup your own mindset. I think that's what we need to do.
So you've listened to 2 light and breezy
Very
episodes
happy
about online trolling, harassment, celebrity bashing behaviour, and why people engage in it and what we can do about it. And I kind of feel like I hate seeing this stuff online, right? It's horrible to see it online. But when I understand why it happens and why so many people get caught up in it sometimes, it does actually make me feel a little bit better. I don't feel like all of those people are psychopaths. I feel like there are some of those people in there creating a social norm and creating an environment where it's okay to do that, and other people get caught up in it. And I think there's kind of a little bit of hope maybe for the people who get caught up in it, that if they understand this behaviour, they might be less likely to do it. And for people who are the victims, that not everyone out there who's saying this stuff to them is a psychopath.
We still need standard practice, like disengagement from that content, reporting of that content, not hunting people to report that content because of the experiences we've chatted about, but certainly a bit of disassociating on the kind of target's behalf too. Yeah.
But unfortunately, I think the internet at the moment is more inclined towards this kind of toxic behavior. Like we're seeing it everywhere at the moment, although for now, fingers crossed, I don't want to jinx it, but blue sky is quite a lovely place to be, and I haven't seen it so much.
It's a good point, like staying away from spaces or social spaces that encourage this behaviour, because you do not have time to regulate them. That's not your job. It's actually ironically their job, surprise.
Yeah.
So kind of giving yourself a bit of respite from some of those spaces too is pretty important.
Yeah. I'd love to see some of those gossip sites just disappear. I think they're extremely toxic. And if you go on those sites thinking that it's just fun and you don't really partake in it, it's probably eroding the barriers of your own kind of moral engagement online, because you start to see this as really normal. You're much more likely to take part in it as well. So it's best to avoid those kind of spaces.
I'd love to see studies on the people who engage in those sites in their offline behaviour.
Yeah. Well, I always say they probably have "be kind" in their profile.
Okay.
Always wary of people who "be kind" in their profile.
I'm going to have to add that now.
Yeah. So thank you so much for listening. And we will see you in 2 weeks' time on Tuesday for the next episode. In the meantime, you can find us on social media. We are on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube and Blue Sky at InBits Podcast. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to get your feedback, your experiences, and what you would like us to talk about. So please send through suggestions on what topics you'd like us to cover. This episode was produced and edited by Owen Hurley, who is also responsible for our very lovely theme music, which we're very grateful for. So thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you soon.
And see you in 2 weeks.